Good morning, dear students. This is Amit sir, your ICT teacher. Today, we are going to learn about algorithm basics and its characteristics from the topic Algorithms and Flowcharts. In the previous class, we have already studied a little about algorithm and flowchart. In this session, we will discuss it more widely. So, the first question is, what is algorithm? The word algorithm means a process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem solving operations. Therefore, we can say that algorithm refers to a set of rules or instructions that step by step define how a work is to be executed upon in order to get the expected results. As we know, the computer works in a IPO cycle, where I stands for input, P stands for process, and O stands for output. Similarly, the algorithm works like it, where it takes a data as input, then it applies some rules or a finite number of steps to get a proper result as output. It can be understood by taking an example of cooking a new recipe. To cook a new recipe, one reads the instruction and steps and execute them one by one in a given proper sequence. The result thus obtained is the new dish cooked perfectly. Similarly, an algorithm helps to do a task in programming to get the expected output. The algorithm designed are language independent. That is, they are just plain instructions that can be implemented in any language, and yet the output will be the same as expected. Let's take an example where we have to write an algorithm to add two numbers entered by the user. So the first step should be start. Step 2. Declare variable num1, num2 and sum. So here a question arises. What is variable? This is a new word. Okay. So a variable is any entity that can take on different values. Anything that can vary can be considered as a variable. For instance, age can be considered a variable because age can take different values of different people or for the same people at different times. Similarly, country can be considered a variable because a person's country can be assigned a value. Similarly, here we assign num1, num2 and sum as variables, where num1 can be any number that will be entered by the user, num2 will be the second number that will be entered by the user, and sum will carry the result of the addition of num1 and num2. So I hope now you understand variable. So let's come back to our program. Okay, algorithm. Step 3. Read values num1 and num2. So after assigning the variables have to read the values that will be input by the user. Next step, step 4. Add num1 and num2 and assign the result to sum. So sum is equal to num1 plus num2. Here the processor add the digits num1 and num2, whatever the values this variable will carry, and save the result as sum. Next, step 5. Display sum. It will display the result as output on any output device on your computer. Next, step 6. Stop. Now let's talk about characteristics of an algorithm. Any written instruction for programming is not an algorithm. Remember that. Anything whatever is written for programming is not always an algorithm. In order for some instructions to be an algorithm, it must have the following characteristics: clear and unambiguous, well-defined inputs, well-defined outputs, finiteness, feasible, language independent. It should have these 6 characteristics. Then we will consider that instruction for programming as an algorithm. Let's talk about this in brief. Clear and ambiguous. Algorithm should be clear and unambiguous. Each of its steps should be clear in all aspects and must lead to only one meaning. Means it should be proper and it should be only fine to one result, one definite result. Next, well-defined inputs. If an algorithm says to take inputs, it should be well-defined inputs. Next, well-defined outputs. The algorithm must clearly define what output it will be yielded, and it should be well defined as well. Next, finiteness. The algorithm must be finite. That is, it should not end up in an infinite loops or similar. For example, suppose we are writing an algorithm for division where we need 2 inputs from the user and the user make input as 0 and 1, where 0 is the divisor and 1 is the dividend. So when we divide 1 by 0, the result will go into infinite loop. The program will never stops. So for these types of situation, we also have to define the program, what it should do, and after how many steps it should be stopped. Next, feasible. The algorithm must be simple, generic and practical, such that it can be executed upon the available resources. It must not contain some future technology or anything like that. And the last characteristic of an algorithm, that it should be language independent. The algorithm designed must be language independent. That is, it must be just plain instructions that can be implemented by any language, and yet the output will be same as expected. Okay, that's all for today's class. Let's sum up what we done today. That an algorithm is a finite sequence of well-defined, computer implementable instructions, typically to solve a class of problems or to perform a calculation or computation work. Then what is variable? And at last, The various characteristics of an algorithm. How can we define any written instructions for programming? Is an algorithm or not? That's all for today. Take care, stay safe, have a nice day.